So thank you very much indeed, Simon, for that enormous introduction. I feel quite overwhelmed at living up to that now. And I should just say that I take it quite personally that Paul's back here, because Hammerson's office in London is directly opposite Grosvenor's office. And I was here for some 10 years, and within weeks, I think, of me arriving back, he'd come all the way back here. But good to see you both. So Grosvenor's sustainability vision, let me just start to give you an idea of what we've done. And there's an awful lot here, so I sort of slightly apologise in advance, but please, feel free, I'm going to sort of whisk over it to come back to it in questions if there's something you really want to dig into. So for those of you, this is what Simon had asked us to cover, so really a little bit about Grosvenor in case you don't know who we are, what we've done in terms of sustainability vision, the value of that as we see it, and really how we went about creating that. So Grosvenor is a privately owned property group with developers, investors and fund managers. We have 17 offices internationally, and we have £12 billion worth of assets under management in about 60 different cities around the world. So very much a long history of stewardship, and for those of you who don't know, the London estate, which is essentially 300 acres of Mayfair and Belgravia, has and is now some of the most valuable real estate in the world in London, has been in the family for about 300 years. The family actually developed it and has held it over that period of time. So we very much recognise that the sustainability, well, the future of cities in which we operate is sort of linked to our own success. So we very much take that long-term view. And we very explicitly have this focus on cities. We really think that that's where value is created and taking sort of a role in helping and ensuring that the city develops in a sustainable way. So we continually build that expertise and that understanding, hence why the sort of living cities mantra is sort of the beginning. So what is that vision? Well, our vision is to use this expertise that we believe we have to help create and manage cities which are socially and economically robust and which only use the resources which are annually renewable, and to by 2030 to have played an active role in doing that and to be recognised for that. It's a pretty big call. And how are we doing that? And I guess when we discussed this, and as Simon says he's been working with us for a while on this, it was very much around that sort of wanting to stimulate thought, debate, research and challenge, and sort of then also having this framework and language which we could use, which would be consistent across the business, so that people would feel enabled to articulate what it was they wanted to achieve and also be able to articulate what they had achieved. And why we like it is because it is city focused, and that's very much where our interest lies, but it's future led. So we explicitly sort of thought, okay, rather than trying to sort of from the beginning think, incremental improvement, and sort of realising in 2030 or 2050 that we'd ended up very far short of where we needed to be, we explicitly kind of thought out and then almost worked back to say, well, if that's where we need to be, and this is the pace of change, then how are we going to get there? And with that knowledge, then really driving the vision. So it adopts 8 goals, which I'll talk you through in a second, and a series of sub-goals. And sort of critically, I guess, they're holistic and interlinked, as you would expect, because that's where we feel the real value exists. So I'll come to each of these in turn, but just so you get an idea. It does take this very broad view of sustainability, so it includes climate resilience, for example, which a few years ago you might not have seen there. This strong community, so very much the social elements as well. Economic resilience, because we felt without that, all these other things couldn't exist, and strong governance. And under each of these, just to sort of give you an idea of the level of thinking, and this took a significant amount of time to draw together, there are all these different sub-goals. So each of these kind of overarching goals then is underpinned by these sub-goals. So to give you an idea of the flavour of them, so sustainable resources. So this would, this includes energy, land, water. So, resources, and I guess the point is at the outset we said, well, what would the city need to do to be sustainable in the long term? Well, it would need to have sustainable resources. So essentially they're an end state. They're not sort of an incremental improvement. This is where we would ultimately need to end up to have a sustainable city. So it's about meeting that long-term need. High quality place. And this is one, I think, particularly with the sort of property lens that we felt was essential to have there, because this was kind of sort of Grosvenor's lens, or any property company's lens, I suppose, on really what could our sort of role in achieving these things be. So it's very much this high-quality urban environment that enriches people's lives and has this distinct sense of place that engenders civic pride, which I think is a critical piece, which then in turn enables the strong community. So strong communities which are vibrant, healthy, safe, respectful, friendly, an awful lot of words here, but and there are an awful lot of sub-goals that underpin each of these elements. So this sort of overarching theme is this sort of diverse, accessible, affordable, and happy. That was actually, I hate to say it, but a sort of a late entrant, but we sort of agreed that actually without that, all the rest didn't really stand for anything. We wanted happy citizens in these cities. And healthy environment, so low levels of pollution, diverse habitats, supporting high quality of life. So that's very much about air quality, pollution, etc. And then climate resilience, which I'll come back to in a moment because you'll see we've just undertaken a report around that. But I think what we're particularly interested in is how each of these interlink, and that will become apparent when we get to sort of the project level when I talk about how we're actually using this research. And now we have got this intranet site, so because we're an international organisation, that's obviously very important. How you actually go about sharing this knowledge is quite tricky in an organisation of that nature. And I obviously, whilst I do travel a lot, I can't be everywhere all the time. So it very much needs the teams to own it and understand these goals. And so our offices are sort of quite far flung, and that is a challenge in the sense that not just geographically, but each of them, we have a devolved structure, so each of them has its own executive board, they each essentially have autonomy within their region. And so I work for the holding company, and we work with each of the teams, but essentially we work helping to persuade and sort of direct, but without that sort of dictatorial role, as it were. We can't, we don't have the final say. Each of the boards has to make their own decision. So it is very much about that kind of process of persuasion, which obviously makes it, in many ways, harder. But also when those teams do get it, then obviously they have the power to really implement, and that has really come into its own recently. So with that kind of vision, particularly one of the things we've been able to do is take a much longer term approach to sustainability. And one of the things which we're interested in particularly is the resilience of cities in which we invest. So, as I say, we're in 60 different cities internationally, but as a global investor, how do you determine which are going to be the most sustainable over the long term? And so we started sort of unpicking that and looking at resilience as a function of both vulnerability and adaptive capacity. And we have ranked 50 global cities, and there's a report which I think Simon's put copies of for you all when you go out if you're interested. Around what we've done here, but this is specifically on environmental and social resilience, so it's kind of an overlay to what you would normally have in terms of economic resilience. That enables us to sort of plot all these cities one against the other, and then to compare sort of cities in which we're currently present to see how they perform relative to one another, and also in context of the fund management business to think about global cities funds with different clients. So it has a number of applications, but it really is thinking consciously about where are these cities going. Yes, there might be good returns to be made in the short term in some of these cities that aren't tremendously resilient, but we thinking longer term, where would we rather that our money was placed? And that enables you to then start to profile each of the cities. Vancouver comes up very well in the analysis, which is one of our markets in North America. Whereas other cities such as Mexico City come up less well. There are lots of vulnerabilities and low adaptive capacity as well. And that sort of explicitly enables us to then start thinking from a capital allocation point of view when we look at kind of our international capital allocation. Typically we've looked at the kind of the pink indicators, as it were, and now we explicitly align resilience with those to say, okay, well, when we're making these decisions, it's not to say we wouldn't invest in any of the less resilient markets, but it is consciously taking that decision knowing that that is a less resilient market and hopefully having understood those risks. And at a city level, for example, London, which obviously is one of our absolute core markets and our historic base, we're able to really understand those risks in a lot of detail and start to really dig into them. And this is the case study for London. And that then enables us at each different stage of the process to think about that. So at the very outset, in this sort of pre-purchasing phase, thinking, okay, well, what are the city challenges? And how might we, if we were to purchase this piece of land, or whatever it is, actually influence those? And what might we be able to contribute to solving some of those problems. So for London, as you would have seen on that slide, the high vulnerability areas of affordability and crime, and very much this inequality debate and air pollution are currently being fined by the EU. So you start to sort of think, okay, well, could we have a positive impact in those areas? And this is a site that we've just acquired in Bermondsey, south of the river in London, which directly responds to that challenge. So I think through having the Living Cities vision, we then started really unpicking what the London estate currently does. And one of the areas we became uncomfortable was this idea of inequality, because it is very expensive real estate, and affordability. And so we directly challenged ourselves and said, okay, well, could we do something outside the estate to provide more affordable accommodation? So that's what we're trying to do here. And you can see this is one of the slides from the project team of actually how they've started to analyse the affordability of the site and where they're trying to pitch their product. So then sort of understanding those challenges, you can then start to think, okay, well, what might the priority goals for this project be? And so we've got this, I think it's really called the board game, which I'm always a little bit reluctant to call the board game because it seems to sort of dumb down something which is obviously incredibly important. But if each of these are the sub-goals, so you can start to say, okay, well, does this have a sort of negative impact, which is this outer element, or does it have a low impact, medium impact, or is it actually having a profoundly high and good quality impact on this subject for the city? And so with each of those, you can start to think, okay, well, if we did this, then that would have a low impact, but we might be able to challenge ourselves to do a bit more. If we did that, then that would also have an impact on another element. And so you can start to see how they sort of interplay. And it's a very visual way, instantly, of sort of starting to say, I can't remember which project this was, but okay, so there's some pretty weak community impacts here for the pink segment. And could we work to move those in, and what would we need to do to ensure they could, and how would they impact on the other areas? And then with that, to set some very specific targets. So this, for example, just to give you an idea of the different type of products we have and the different challenges, this is a very upmarket product on the estate, which will be the new Peninsula Hotel in London. So how do you work with something like that to make it more sustainable? It's very challenging, but the team are adopting these goals and working through them. And so water is clearly a key element. Big hotels are very, very greedy sort of water consumers. So they've worked to ensure that they're really maximising the efficiency and minimising the consumption of the water in that project. And just to give you a flavour of the type of projects, we're having to, these goals are designed to be flexible. So this is a high-end residential project in Ambleside in Vancouver, and a sort of city centre extension in Oxford at a much lower price point. So very sort of flexible in that respect, but I guess it's sort of the direction of travel. They're all sort of consciously contributing to the vision. And so this is just one of the operating companies. So I referred to the fact that we're sort of structured by region, and GBI, as we refer to it, is Grosvenor, Britain and Ireland. And so their approach to Living Cities has been to say, okay, well, that's kind of the group ambition. What will that mean for our strategic plan? So they've come up with this thing called Your Contribution, which it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's about sort of really challenging in turn each member of the business, saying, okay, well, what's your contribution going to be to the strategic plan and to our Living Cities ambition? And they've come up with 3 areas. This is obviously the first couple of years, but the Community Projects Programme, the London State Energy Plan, and the Procurement Supply Chain. So in the community project, they've created these 5 projects just for this year. So, and these are sort of, some of them relatively light of touch, but it's about sort of really creating that change in mindset, I guess, and really consciously engaging with the community. Which when they looked at the 8 goals was the one they felt, I think, most uncomfortable with, for around some of the points of affordability, but also around doing more kind of to engage existing tenants. So you can see those 5 there. I'll just quickly take you through them. So creating a buzz, this is about more bees on the estate, and also then providing the biodiversity to enable them to exist on the estate, and having these parklets around the estate. So we've worked with Jan Gell, who you may have heard of as an architect from Copenhagen, and he has helped us do a public realm strategy for the estate. And so each of these kind of elements feeds into that. A food bank, so to establish a food bank within London Estate for those who are facing financial hardship. We do have a huge amount of social housing on the estate. So this is very much more around that. Creating a film festival, so really starting to use our squares more actively and really sort of encourage people in. And then fitness in the gardens. So in Brown Hut Garden, which is a new public space we've just created on top of a substation at first floor level in Mayfair, just literally about 100 yards off Oxford Street. It's an amazing kind of oasis. And then in Grosvenor Square and Belgrave Square. So. And community arts, so really delivering dynamic and interesting programmes through interaction with schools, etc., just to force us a more cohesive community within the London estate. And the energy plan is more around the healthy environment goal. So this is very much talking to that long-term approach of stewards of the London estate. So thinking about proactively upgrading our buildings to support them so that we're avoiding this risk of environmental and economic obsolescence. So these are two examples. One where we've done a sort of super green planning application that actually strives to meet the 2050 targets today. This is on a grade 2 listed property, so that's 80% reduction in carbon emissions today, versus one sort of 3 doors along where we're doing our standard retrofit and then we're monitoring both to see how they perform and also to see the market response in terms of value. So it is again about taking that longer term approach, but this is very much about improving the air quality, reducing the heat island effect. So we've done thermographic imaging across the whole estate to sort of get a baseline of where we currently sit. And we believe that there'll be a huge number of benefits, but it's very difficult to quantify a lot of them at this stage. So, the building fabric, by definition, because it is 300 years old and is heritage listed, it's quite difficult in some respects to change it tremendously. But we've been working with the conservation officers to find solutions they're happy with. So we believe that there'll be a huge number of benefits for health for our tenants, for thermal comfort, and we've been also working with them to ensure that we've got a toolkit that they can work to. Legislation is a driver as well, because these properties in 2018 we won't be able to let. So that's kind of the sort of backstop, where we're trying to be far more proactive about it and say, okay, well, how can we really drive value and be on the front foot? And so that's what we've been doing. By the end of this year, we'll have improved 300 units, and it is very much about taking kind of a no-regrets decision, because we went to the board and we said, look, intuitively we know all this makes sense, we know we've got to do it anyway in the long run, but we'd like to do it sooner than that because we think it could really create value. And they said, okay, fine, well, we're prepared to set aside £5 million per annum at that stage for you to do the things which wouldn't be economic in the strictest sense at this point, because we believe, as you say, that this will pay off in the long term. So that's the approach we've been taking. We're doing a sort of normal retrofits, but then with these sort of additional areas that we've been able to take forward. So as you can see there, sorry I missed it, we're doing passive house units again within the context of the conservation area and listed property. So quite ambitious and stuff that hasn't been done before. And finally, how am I doing for time? I don't want to eat up all Paul's time. Am I going?
I think we're going okay.
Okay? Okay, fine. So sustainable procurement was the final element of the GBI goals. And this is looking at all these areas and seeing how they can really influence them. And I think what I liked is they literally took the Living Cities goals and thought, okay, well, which can we meet? As they went through and sort of, this is slides again from that project team, and sort of ringed each of them that they thought they could have a positive impact on. And then that very much informed and flowed into the overall aims of the project, and then in turn into team and individual goals. So you can see the icons that they're sort of in each instance drawing out things that they thought would be affected positively. So this then does become very much kind of your contribution. Okay, well this is what the holding company's doing, this is what we as an operating company are doing, this is what the project management team's delivering, this is what your team within it's delivering, and this is your obligation. And the other area which has had a really big impact, I guess, just in this last year, is London State Vision. So each of those elements has been mapped against the Living Cities goals. So that's kind of given them a framework and clarity of language, I think, to really start consciously thinking about all these different elements. So I think that's really provided a challenge to them and been quite a helpful process. And then also another area of business that we're sort of growing at the moment is indirect investments, so as well as the geographic operating companies and fund management. We now also take a stake in existing businesses where we would like exposure either because of geographic diversity, because of sectoral diversity. So essentially places we currently don't have an exposure. And so we're consciously trying to think, well, what could we do that would meet our living cities ambitions through indirect investments? There's actually an element of the overall budget that's entirely attributable to kind of things that we would want to support. And so how do we do that? Kind of going back to the beginning, I guess. So I mean, I think fundamentally sustainability fits our brand very well. So in that sense, it was sort of, as Simon says, a bit of a challenge, but kind of an easy challenge to make. Well, if it's almost, well, guys, if we're not doing this, surely we of all people should be doing this, because we've got longevity, we've got 300 years. We have this understanding of cities, and that's, when we really look at the global themes, these things are going to pan out. And we have these specialist capabilities, and our values of loyalty, expertise, and long-termism are very, they play to this agenda. And so we started some time ago, as Simon said, with sort of my appointment, and then we did, as most people do, started with reporting, and understood quite quickly we didn't know what we were doing, in the sense that we didn't have the data to support that. So it was probably a year or two until we were able to publish our first report, because particularly with London State, it's very difficult to gather the data. But very quickly, so we started to understand the incremental improvement. Whilst that's important, and we started to understand, undertake some staff behavioural sort of incentives and changes, which were very well received, and this was a personal carbon tracker that we did. But I think when we started to then do some research with Cambridge University around energy efficiency in the built environment, that's when we started to really pose the big questions and say, okay, well, you can see the first piece was called How Might We Use Energy in 2050? And what are the barriers to energy efficiency being overcome? How can policy improve the performance of buildings? And then we started to really engage with the big questions, and it became much more of a strategic discussion. And then, sort of a growing awareness, really, of the sort of scale of the global challenge became apparent. The explosive population growth, increased consumption, particularly in the middle class, increasing urbanisation, and really just this time of unprecedented change, which I know you're all very aware of, so I don't need to labour. And then we started to work with the business and say, okay, well, of those themes, which do you think are going to be most material for us? And the immediate reaction is for everyone to sort of step back and say, well, no, this isn't going to affect us. And so we were very specific, and we sort of laid it out. We said, okay, well, look, this is the potential event, increased demand for water, and possibly reduced supply through decreased rainfall, leads to water stress in cities. And that could be driven by population or industrial and agricultural growth, or because the climate's becoming hotter and drier. Okay, well, in that instance, what might the stakeholder response be? Well, the water utilities would probably increase the cost of water. Governments might mandate efficiency measures and restrictions. Tenants might start choosing different buildings, and investors might start trying to mitigate those risks. So then what would the implications be for us? And so we literally kind of went through and spelled each of these things out. And then at the bottom, we always had a sort of section of, well, even if in the face of all of that, there are still some naysayers. Okay, well, here are some examples in markets in which we currently operate where this is already happening. So this was some time ago we did this, but you can see 2007, 2009, Californian drought. We've got a large office in San Francisco. China, 7% of the world's resources, 20% of the world's population, et cetera, and the fact that that figure at the bottom is actually quite staggering. By 2020, it's predicted that there will be 20 million environmental refugees in China caused by water supply stress. That was the World Bank. So that was just really something to sort of get the teams engaged. Okay, this is happening, it's real, and how are we going to ensure that we have a vision that meets this? And so there were 20 of these. I'm just giving you a couple of examples. Sea level rise was another. And then we started to say, okay, well, for your business, and obviously this was different in Asia, it's different, in the UK, etc. But in your business, how do you think this will affect you? And so they started to really prioritise those. And then in our annual review that year, Mark, who's our CEO, came out and said, look, it's really clear that whilst we don't understand exactly the implications, business is going to have to take a lead on this. And so that really kind of sort of set us out there and made the point that, we were, I guess in a way putting ourselves up to be shot down, but at the same time we were happy to back it up, so it was okay. And around the same time, we started to take a couple of sort of delegations of senior leaders to Cambridge to really, not so much, I mean, these are all smart guys, you know, they all kind of, in many ways, get this stuff, but I think had never really had the time to sit back and actually piece it all together. You know, they read the papers every day, but actually when you go somewhere like this and the calibre of the speakers is just phenomenal, and they started, you know, really laying out in a very unemotive way kind of the big picture. And they all came back. I mean, it was just like flicking a switch. They all suddenly got it in a way that they hadn't before, and it was very personal. So whatever it was that they personally had got was really then motivating them. And suddenly it was like sort of having an army of champions rather than it kind of being me sort of always feeling like I was pushing. And that was, I think, the real sort of tipping point. And then out of that final session, so originally we had one with senior leaders, and they all came back and said, that was so good that you, CEO, should go. And so then, by demand, I kind of had to run another, which was a wonderful position to be in. And we went through the draft vision at that stage with a number of them. So I think, in fact, this was done before that final programme. I think we ran about 80 of our staff in the end through the only 500 or something internationally, through the Cambridge programme. We undertook a huge number of, 350 was the online survey respondents, 28 was the number of people I interviewed individually from the group boards and the individual OPCO boards. So you get a sense of sort of the really deep consultation that we undertook. And sorry, the final one is the workshops that we did, and the 213 were involved in the workshops that we ran to, we called them strategy development sessions. In fact, we didn't call them workshops, we didn't want them to feel it was all up in the air. We were kind of really getting down to brass tacks of strategy. And during that process, I think, you know, this growing knowledge again of the enormity of the challenge, this need for transformational change, and just really this responsibility. So suddenly they had the knowledge, and they were no longer ignorant, they had to act. And there was this call for this strategic plan, this long-term vision. So that was a wonderful thing. The business was then asking us for sort of a strategic plan. There's an irrefutable fact that the world is currently living beyond the Earth's capacity, 1.5 planets. And so this idea of one planet cities was what kind of drove, and I guess that was a real call to action. Okay, how can we live within one planet? And then we set out these goals. So you'll see this is now the living cities. But we had for a long time had a sort of strapline, living cities, which talked to our sort of understanding of cities. But it had never really been substantiated, or what did that mean was happening in our strategy. It was just sort of, an expertise in an area of interest. And so suddenly we were able to say, okay, that one planet cities are living cities. And so that was very much the way we framed it. And then more recently, this just really talks to some of the progress I've shown you already. But it has really got a head of steam now. The teams are owning it. And so when I started, I said, we wanted it to stimulate thought and debate, and it absolutely has. And it seems to have provided a license for people to do things differently. And it has this common language across the business, and that sort of seems to have enabled a real sort of empowerment for people to take it on. And it does seem to be creating this value and market recognition that increasingly we're able to actually put our finger on, which at the outset might have been a bit intangible. Thank you. Sorry.
I might wander around as well. Apologise if I faint, fall over or run out the door. I was been sick for the last 2 days, so but I know this has been postponed once. I didn't want to postpone it again, so I'll give you the best I can and see how we go. That was fantastic. I've never actually seen all that. It was brilliant. I was quite absorbed. We're in a lot earlier part of our journey. We've only been I've only been back with Mirvac. I've only been with Mirvac for 1.5 years, and our strategy was only launched in March, so we're a bit earlier in the piece. But I'll take you through where we started, where we are now, and a little bit of the journey and the results we've got so far. So Mirvac, probably most people in the room know us, but we're a property development company. We develop, own, construct, manage property, offices, retail, residential and industrial. In fact, last year was the first time we'd constructed more commercial office than we've ever constructed residential. So it's a big flip for us in moving towards a very much a commercial focus as well as residential. When I arrived at Mirvac, one of the first things I began to learn was we've got a very rich history in sustainability across the business. This is one of our first projects, which was Newington. I say one of our first projects probably we're more renowned for from a sustainability perspective, which is Newington, the Olympic Village. It was the first solar community in Australia, and one of our long-standing, long-lasting visions for what a sustainable community should be. Mirvac have also been responsible for, so I'm going to grab projects like Bond University, which is the first 6 Green Star educational building, Orion Shopping Centre, which is the first 6 Green Star shopping centre in Australia. Oops, let's see if this works. Yeah, great. This is a building that we built down in Waverley Park, which is called Harmony 9, which is a 9 NATAS rated building. This was built like 5 years ago. A bit like Kate, I think, in this line for our business, this was a case of let's build something, test it, find out what the opportunities are within that building, and then use that to demonstrate on new products. So we took a lot of learnings from this and built a new product called Kimberley Zero, which was much more viable. This cost 5 years ago. This cost $1 million, and there's no way you could sell it for more than that. So we actually used it as a test case. All those nice shiny new buildings are great, but this is an example of the other things that Mirvac do. This is 10 to 20 Bond Street right here in Sydney, where we've taken an existing asset and completely gutted it, repositioned that asset, and in doing so we reduced the energy consumption by over 56% and the water consumption by nearly 50%. So I think a lot of people talk about the new shiny products, but actually the white elephant in the room has always been the existing buildings. How do we reposition those? So as you can see, Mirvac had a very rich history on sustainability. So as this is mainly around how we set our strategy, I'll tell you a little bit about that. So when I arrived at the company, I spent, seems like an inordinate amount of time basically going around the whole business, understanding what we already do in sustainability. And I created this kind of heat map, looking at 20 themes on sustainability and going and ask our different business sections and different building sectors what they were already doing. It's amazing when you go to someone the first time, you ask them the question, and then you go back and you've got a red dot on their heat map that says they don't do it. You get an amazing, better response the second time. And then the third time when you go back again, by that time it's now getting more like amber and then towards the green area. So but basically we're asking them, what are we doing on sustainability? And I kept going back to them and back to them. So I did over 300 interviews in the space of 3 months with different people in our business. We then went out and we basically interviewed our key stakeholders, a group from our key stakeholders. I wouldn't say all of them. We've got a lot of key stakeholders. We also had already done, before I arrived, a materiality study in 2012 and another one in 2013, so I wasn't about to go and do another one. It's basically taking those stakeholders through the journey and making sure that a lot of the findings from a materiality study were still real today. We also then did a trends analysis, so looking at what were the key trends that were going to be expected in the future, where are the key trends that we should pay attention to when we're delivering our sustainability strategy. And then we did some external interviews with some key people we felt were important to us. So it might be our key stakeholders, but like key stakeholders from our supply chain, construction, government, various parts of the external matrix. What was interesting then was we took all this information and we basically held a 2-day workshop. We got a bunch of people from across our business and across levels in our business, across the different sectors of our business, and we sat them in a room for 2 days and we presented initially the findings of what we'd gone through, and then we asked them to start to take that and work out what key themes we'd need to concentrate on as a leadership position, and then set some missions and identify some commitments we could make. One of the fun things of that 2 days was to get my executive leadership team, so this is my CEO here, and we basically got those teams to actually pitch to the executive leadership team their idea for a mission statement. And I'd said to the executive leadership team, and make sure that you push them, I want them to be ambitious. So they were like, yeah, okay, we'll definitely do that, we'll make sure they're ambitious. So when one of the teams pitched the idea of us being net positive by 2030, and my head of capital turned around and said, I'm not sure you're being ambitious enough, I don't think he really understood exactly what I meant. But anyway. So it was a really interesting piece for us. The outcome of all of this day was then presented to the board at the end of the day. It was actually the first time I'd ever met the board. They came in that evening and we basically ran through the whole of the outcome of those 2 days. What actually came out of those 2 days is pretty much what our strategy is today. It was pretty much the same words. We've changed a couple of the commitments, but essentially this is it. And it's interesting, I was just looking at what Kate's diagrams and drawings and images, and actually, you know, they're very similar in the fact that one of the reasons we have this diagram is the idea, the concept that all these elements are interwoven, they're interlinked. You can't just look at environment on its own, or energy on its own, or water on its own, or place on its own, or community on its own. They're all interlinked and all interwoven. And that was how the thought process came behind this diagram. So we have 4 areas of focus. The first one, shaping the future of place. The second is enriching communities, reimagining resources, and smarter thinking. And under each of these we've set mission statements. Some are long-term, some are short-term. I'll explain the reasons behind that in a second. Before I do though, I'll just show you a quick video.
What would you change in the future? The way we make energy? Or the way we use it? The way we live in our homes? Or the way we create them? Would you change the way we work? The way we get there? Or both? Would you change the way we invest in our people? Or the way we invest in all people? Would you change one thing? Or all these things? After all, one change leads to another, then another. And when we start thinking like that, we can change everything. This Changes Everything is our plan for a sustainable future. See how we're changing the world and how you can help at mirvac.com/change.
So our program is called This Changes Everything. And we were there before Mercedes, and we were there before Naomi. It was Klein as well, just in case you're wondering. And we started to lay out a roadmap for what that means in the future, the whole plan. So I'm going to take you through this slowly, but before I do, I'll just give you a bit of understanding about the mission statements we made. So under reimagining resources, we set ourselves the goal to be net positive by 2030. That's for energy and water. So essentially we're saying we're going to generate more energy than we consume, and we're going to capture or use more recycled water than we consume. Under shaping the future of place, we set out to create a framework for the future of place by 2015, and that's a shorter term mission, and the reason is that we actually felt that as a group we needed to do more work on this and understand a bit more about what place actually meant to us, and what it means to us moving forward in the future. So again, I'll talk you through the detail. For smarter thinking, it was around create a smart portfolio by 2020, and that smart being undefined by us at this time. We're still going through the process of defining exactly what we feel smart buildings mean, the smart portfolio means. And then finally, enriching communities to demonstrate community investment within and beyond our boundaries by 2018. So I'm pleased to say underneath all of those mission statements and underneath all of that we've got commitments. Under each of those areas of focus we've got commitments. And the commitments obviously lead us towards our mission statement. So one of our first commitments was to complete a community investment tool, online tool for our business, so we can measure what we do as a business when we're investing into communities. We've based this loosely around the London Benchmarking Group system. And basically, we've put that in place a year ahead of schedule, which is great for us. It means we can start to measure it. With Mirvac, it's interesting. We already do a lot of work in the community. We've got some fantastic initiatives already running. And for us, it was much more around, rather than setting out what community work we should do, it's actually much more around measuring what we already do. once we measure it and monitor it, we can actually then manage it. We can make sure the investment we're making already is in the right direction, in the right places, and we're taking the right approach. So our community investment measures, so what Mirvac actually do, so what we do as a company. So that's whether we donate space in time, in kind, we volunteer, or we donate just pure cash. And we can measure all that ourselves, and then also what we create other people to leverage community investment. So if we give space to someone, they can leverage that space to use it for other purposes. So last week, Mirvac held our first ever community day for our entire company, which was 730 people went out on one day, 47 different events, 35 different charities, which is a fantastic achievement for us. We've never done that before. We've also set out to pre-qualify our supply chain. Again, early days for us. We've just created our first responsible procurement policy. We've now put in place a new questionnaire and code of conduct for our suppliers, and we'll start to issue that out to our suppliers in the early part of next year, with the aim that we'll pre-qualify by value 50% before the end of this financial year. What that means is we're actually going out, and at this stage it's about encouraging and engaging. It's not about holding the stick and beating people. It's actually saying, we want you to come along on this journey with us. Here's some questions we'd like to know the answers to, but if you don't know the answers right now, ring us, call us, let's get involved. And actually, it's been really interesting, just by taking that approach. Already we've had some major suppliers of ours come back to us and say, look, we really like this. Can we take it to our board? We want to show our board what you're doing, because we believe that will help drive them to change. It will drive them to actually do more for our company. Okay. There you go. Far at you, Glenn, that's what it is. We also committed to complete life cycle assessments on all our projects after June this year. We started this process, we're underway. We've got, I think, 5 or 6 life cycle assessments underway. I can't say that we'll be doing this forever. This is really just to start to map out the whole of life aspect of our buildings. And again, this is a bit about pre-planning research work to understand where we can make the biggest difference. So we've got 2 things underway here. One is on project specific, so we're actually rolling this out across different projects. So we've already done life cycle assessments of different housing products. We've already done a couple of life cycle assessments of our apartment buildings. We're underway with a couple on commercial. But we're also doing it specifically around materials, so we're doing 2 life cycle assessment deep dives, as I call them, on concrete and steel. So we start to understand a bit more about those products, where our current supply chain impacts, and then how we can make changes. This to me is, again, a bit more about heat mapping. It's about finding where the opportunities are for us to influence and make a change. It was interesting again to see there's so many similarities in Kate's presentation about place. We're at the very start of this journey. We recognise, one of our core strategies around place, our vision is to create great places for people. So it's actually, this is inherent in what we do as a business. But we felt we could learn more about it, so we're doing a research project at the moment, which is well underway actually. We have completed internal focus groups. We've completed an internal working group session with 120 people from our business. We're underway with place audits. We've got external research bodies underway. We're doing expert interviews, and we've also got external focus groups with our customers and non-customers of Mirvac, so we can understand what they think about place. We're going to take all that information, and we're holding a Future of Place Forum in the beginning of next year. It was originally due to happen this year, but business needs have changed that timing. So that will give us a direction on what we should be doing on place, and then we'll take that information and we're going to create our own framework on placemaking moving forward. Developing a sustainable lifestyles index. You'll notice a theme with me here, that it's all about measurement. You can't measure it, you don't manage it. You can't manage it, sorry. So we're doing a lot of work on things that will help us measure. So if we're going to create great places, how do we measure them? How do we understand that we're delivering sustainable lifestyles for our tenants, our residents, and people that we affect? So we're starting this process. Actually, we're doing a piece of work internally we call scanning, which is to look at, go and actually understand what our audiences need. So this is really hardcore, in-your-face scanning. So I actually have been going to some of our events with a bunch of buckets and some little labels on them asking people to just drop matchsticks in. They get 5 matchsticks each, and you drop and you vote about what you actually want to see in a community of the future. And we're starting to get some really good insight, and it's just actually talking to our customers. It's actually getting out there and talking to our customers about what they actually want. I did this at Piermont Market. I'm not sure if the ladies in the room, but
I was there.
it was you, was it? and I bumped into you at the market, and you said, "Oh, I was going to go to this sustainability event. It burned the other day, but got cancelled." Oh, great, that was me. Anyway, so we can attest to the fact that I do this, and we're going out and we're finding out exactly what it is our customers want in the future. We've also committed, if we're going to understand what Mirvac are measuring and what we're doing with our community investment, we need to understand what impact we make on the communities around us. So we're committed to create a social return on investment methodology for our business to use as a toolkit to enable us to measure the impact we make on society in general. It's all those things that Kate talked about, like affordability, crime, but it's also health and well-being, jobs, all those things that we can actually measure. So we're basically we're working with KPMG at the moment. They're helping us to deliver a social return on investment tool that we'll be able to use across our business to start to measure those impacts moving forward. That gives us a huge benefit in understanding that the things we're doing, they're the right things to do, and also to understand what we should be doing more of in the future. In 2018, sorry you can't see that, we've got a big year 2018. This is when we're meant to achieve a lot of our main commitments. I'll just run through them quickly. So we're due to deliver 1 megawatt of renewables. We're due to reduce our energy consumption by 15%. Increase our, add 3 closed loop projects, 75% recycling rate across all parts of our portfolio. Reduce our water consumption by 15% and increase our water capture by 15%. And also create a One Planet Living community. That were another similarity. We're aiming to do that as well. So just running through a few of those things now. This is our first building to have solar on it. We're a bit behind the 8 ball. You'd think, wow, a company like ours, we should have a lot more solar going already, but we hadn't. And it's actually this strategy started to kick off this approach to our business. So this is our first one, 80 kilowatt system on 23 Furzer Street, down in Canberra. But we've now got 850 kilowatts out in the marketplace to tender, including some of the shopping centres we own here in Sydney. And that's really what this has been about. It's about breaking down the barriers and driving change. So 1 megawatt, when we first launched this, everyone went, 1 megawatt, that's not a lot. It doesn't sound like a lot for a company your size. And it really isn't. But I always knew the problem wasn't going to be the solar panels. It wasn't going to be getting the solar panels to fit on the roof. It wasn't going to be the cost necessarily even the solar panels. It's actually breaking down some of the regulatory barriers we have about things that how we generate power here and drive it through a network to here, or how we can get money from that by selling it to our tenants, which we hit a thing called Division 6C problems, which means we can't necessarily sell it to our tenants. So there's lots of other regulatory issues that block us from doing this, rather than actually what you'd think would be the problem, which is the cost of a solar panel. So actually that 1 megawatt is kind of negligible, and it doesn't really matter. It's actually, if we can break through those barriers, we'll break through a lot more barriers. So we've started to map out what does that mean to us moving forward. And we, as you can see, if we continue to reduce our energy consumption, we drop down into the 45,000 megawatt hours. That's based on today's size of our portfolio, and we're continually buying, selling, growing, and reducing our portfolio. And then if we continue, we've set ourselves a generation load. And these two, by the way, would line up. So if we can get 35 megawatts of installed load at 2030, in today's numbers, we will be able to generate enough power to run our portfolio. So it is possible. I'm going into that in a bit more detail in a minute. We know in waste, interestingly enough, in our construction portfolio, we're already achieving 96-97% recycling figures. But in our existing investment portfolio, we're more like at 39%. So we've got a long way to go with our investment portfolio, so we're driving at that at the moment. By the end of this financial year for us, which is in June, we'll have 9 new organic recycling systems in place, which means that we'll have taken the wet waste out of our dry waste, which means we've got more chance of recycling our dry waste, which will improve our performance. This is a major shift for us as a business. We hadn't had that commitment or investment because we hadn't had a direction. So having a clear strategy is actually enabling us to drive this change. In the construction portfolio, on the other hand, they're saying, well, bloody hell, brilliant, we can be the first zero waste to landfill projects on the books because we're actually pretty close. So they're looking at that 4% and what is going to get them over the line on that tipping point. How are they going to get over that 4% threshold? On water. Great stuff. Water's a bit more of a difference for us, as in we've in our latest report we've set out the boundaries by which we're going to measure net positive. And with water, a lot of this is around influence as much as it is around actual direct action. So we know that we'll struggle to be net positive in our own portfolio just on the things that we operate and manage ourselves. But if we can influence change, then that makes a big difference about being net positive. And by that I mean, as an example, this is Grosvenor, a new town we're creating down in just outside in Canberra. And this is a new recycled water plant we're putting in place. This will serve 6,500 homes, 16,000 people eventually living in that town. This is a whole new recycled water system that we're creating as a business. We are influencing, therefore, people to be able to use recycled water. We are influencing people's opportunity to not just use potable water. We are making a big difference in their lifestyles, and we'll continue to do that on other projects as well. Also on Google, I missed a slide. Anyway, it doesn't matter. So that's a point about influence rather than about just direct action. With our smart buildings, we're actually, as I said, we're just in the process of defining what smart building is, but we've committed to deliver smart buildings in all of our different asset classes by 2018. This is, again, by setting this commitment, we're driving change in the business. We're having people come and talk to us about what a smart building might look like, how it might actually end up, what the definition might be. So this is actually just, again, focusing people's attention and driving that change. We know that we want to create a smart portfolio, and part of that will be about how we can transfer opportunities across our portfolio. So if you imagine as a business like we are, out west we've got these big industrial sheds with big roofs that sit there empty and hardly any power being used in the sheds. Whereas in the city we own several buildings that have huge energy consumption but no opportunity to generate renewables or not much. So therefore, if we can link those two up, that to me is a smart portfolio. That's one that's enabling us to generate power in one part of our portfolio to serve another. There's a lot of barriers in that. A lot of barriers caused by energy companies, energy regulation, network charges. Chris is smiling because he knows all these things. That we are really in the middle of trying to solve by ourselves, but also with industrial bodies and industrial groups and the councils as well. At Gugon, we're also creating community initiatives first in delivering that project. So we're actually, the team down there have called the locals Gugonians. They've actually tried to create a community before the community is actually created. So they've got this name, they've actually got a flag or a shield which has two barbecue tongs, which I find quite fun. But it's about creating this community feel before anyone even gets there. This is on the edge of town. It's 250 homes going in there initially. They need to create the community first. So we are actually building the community facilities first to actually create that community, create that sense of community, create that sense of place before we actually go along and build the rest of the project. Under Smarter Thinking, we've also committed to educate 1 million people by 2020 on sustainability. To me, this is actually probably one of the fundamentals of our whole plan. It really is a very important part of us delivering this, being able to deliver our whole strategy. For us, for me anyway, personally, education has been one of the biggest barriers to us delivering sustainability, whichever business I've been in across the world, whether that's the UK or here or in the US. So this was really fundamentally a real important point for me that this went into the strategy. As you can see, we've started to map out exactly what that means and how we might get there. So if you imagine 1 million people, when we first set this, we just said, 1 million, that sounds like a good figure. It's nice and round. Don't know how we're going to get there. But actually, if you think about it for us as a business, we have 1,200 staff. We then have about 5,500 suppliers annually. We have a heap of contractors, we have a heap of residents, we have a heap of tenants, and we have millions of people visit our shopping centres. So actually getting to 1 million isn't not as hard as it initially sounds, but still, it's going to be a big ask, and we're only just starting on that journey as we speak. I think last year, in the first 6 months, we've educated 22,000, and at that rate, I'm never going to get to 1 million, so I've got to come up with something quite snappy. But education to me is not just about holding forums like this or actually those classroom sessions. It's actually just about getting what we already do and improving the way we tell people about it. So this is a project where we already had all these sustainability initiatives on it. We won't tell anyone about it. It was just a list, a really boring, ugly list that no one could ever see. If you were buying our apartment, you'd never know about it. You'd never know anything about it. So this is just raising the awareness to everyone. And by putting that education target in, we're actually getting our business to start thinking about doing that. As I said, one of our final commitments in 2030 is to be zero waste. And we're already partway there in our construction business. We're now 81% across the overall business. I mentioned our final commitment is to be net positive by 2030. And interestingly enough, one of the things I found in my researching into starting to work out how we might do this is that actually if we covered our entire portfolio today with solar panels, so that's our industrial sheds, our office buildings and our shopping centres, we could already be net positive. We could do it, we could achieve it today, and it will cost me $130 million, and I'd get a $17 million income stream from that. So actually it's not a bad return if you're in the mood for impact investing. I think the thing is that $17 million is based on me being able to get money from my tenants and people within our buildings to be able to do that, and not suffering the network charges that we get across the grid. And so therefore, actually, it's not really a real figure. It's a theoretical figure. So we've got a lot of work to do to be able to get to that point. But we do know, and it's quite encouraging, that we do have the ability to generate enough power if we were able to solve some of the problems. Which is good, because when we launched this strategy, my CEO stood up and said, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to give it a bloody good try. So that's really our plan. And this year we just basically went forward with our sustainability report, which is called The Year That Changed Everything, and it's online. And if you want to read about how we're doing, please take a look. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I think you'll agree, two very exciting sustainability visions. Great to see them beside each other. There are a lot of similarities. It's, I think it is a leap from what many of us have been doing in the property sector to date, so it's really exciting to see these sorts of areas open up, and also large property groups have really get back to their roots in areas like placemaking, which is where I think a lot of them originated from. Let's have some discussion. I'd like to invite Kate and Paul to please... sorry, Paul, there's no respite. You did well, though. Please grab a seat. I'll just see if I can move this out of the way without causing any trouble. I might get things rolling with one question. I'm trying to think what your CEO, Paul, said. You quoted her at the end. The businesses, your executives, don't know how you're going to achieve these goals. The Living Cities goals are very ambitious. It's the sustainability of cities, and Grosvenor can play a role in that, across a very diverse portfolio of activities. And Paul, as you said, around your 4 missions, you don't know how you're going to achieve them, and you're working on that. What enabled your business, and particularly your executives, to step into the unknown and have the courage to sign off on visions like that without being certain how you're going to get there? And that's to both of you, and either of you can can go first. Maybe you, Kate, to give the poor guy a moment.
Well, I think as I alluded to, our sort of tipping point was that course, really. And at the time, I was quite nervous about it because, and it comes back to the point Paul was making on education, because, you know, it was taking a very, very senior management crew all off-site for a couple of days. And, you know, in terms of kind of cost of the business of that immediate time that was being spent, it was huge. And Cambridge had never run a specific sort of property-focused, not that it was, but, you know, for a property group, or for even for an individual business. It had always been a kind of cross-industry program before. And so they didn't really know how it was going to work, and obviously that added to my nerves. But the calibre of the speakers was fantastic. It just afforded this kind of time for them to really process all the information. In between each kind of input, there was a buzz group, they called it, and you'd sort of sit at tables and there'd be a facilitator. And so people could kind of think it through. It was off-site, so we were away from kind of, you know, the office business as usual. We stayed overnight, so you have the time in the bar, you have dinner, you know, breakfast, and people just kind of came to a very deep understanding of what it was we were asking, and therefore felt, I mean, able to support it, but almost sort of bound to, I think, as well. That was the point, that, you know, they wanted to. And there was this huge energy in the room at the end, and it was kind of that feeling of, oh, we're going to, you know, march on town hall or something, you know what I mean? It was, and so we just had to kind of harness that and sort of channel it. That was for us the big change.
Yeah. And that feeling's stuck, has it?
I mean, you know, you constantly have to kind of reignite it, and I mean, you know, we as you know, I kind of work to ensure that we always get kind of external speakers in who are coming from different perspectives, often outside our own industry, to kind of just, you know, keep providing that challenge and that inspiration to keep it alive and keep the ideas kind of rolling. But yeah, I mean, it does that, and the more that gets, you know, baked in, then the more it kind of, you know, you kind of just hop on to the next level. So it's a process, and you kind of got to keep pushing it. But yeah, a lot of it's retained. Yeah.
And Paul at Mirvac, because, you know, that probably could be called a break from tradition in the Australian property industry to set goals like you have.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of it for them was about the way we went about it was to actually engage the business initially, so actually go out and understand what the business was doing. There's a lot of history in Mirvac, as I said, about sustainability, and so it was really important to actually understand all that before trying to go headlong in with this is what we should be doing. And it became apparent that actually one of the things they were really good at is if you gave them a direction and a focus, then they go for it. So it was kind of almost obvious after a while that we just needed to get a very clear, simple strategy in place. So you'll notice there's not a lot of words in ours. It's really simple. It had to be on one page because I wanted to just make sure that it was very visual, everyone can see it. And I think our business jumped on board because there was a need. They wanted to do it, they just didn't know how. And so once you sort of led them down that direction, then it was fairly easy to get the ambition out of them. I think also there's a growing realisation in the property sector that we're always looking at quarterly reports and half-year reports, and it's just ridiculous. And sustainability allows you that. It kind of allows you to step out of that framework that is normally there and actually look at long-term goals, which you can then use to influence the rest of the business, because the rest of the business is beholden to these quarterly and 6 monthly reports that, from a financial perspective. And so this does enable them to take that step. I'd be silly not to say that, you know, I'm fortunate my CEO was quite happy to take a long-term view, which my previous CEO wasn't as much as I wanted to. Their 5 years was as far as they go. Yeah. So, you know, sometimes you just have to have the luck of the draw, I suppose.
Fantastic. All right, let's open it up to the floor, please.
Last week or a week before, I sat in on a meeting in which the subject of homelessness came up. And I was surprised to hear that London and New York are leading the way. I was equally surprised and disappointed to hear that Sydney is doing very little or nothing at all. So my question to both of you is homelessness part of your social goals or your social program?
Yeah, I'll take that one on, definitely. One of our projects down the road here at 200 George Street, we we had a problem where, well, a concern actually, where we had homeless people sleeping in the streets at the back of our site, and there was a real health and safety danger for us. And our team, instead of sort of discussing it with them and actually just trying to move them on, if you like, actually took a very different approach. We've the Presbyterian Church on Margaret Street, which is just around the corner. They went there. They knew there was a homeless breakfast morning going on there, so they went along, learnt what they were doing, used that, talked to my team about how we could use that to actually create a engagement with the homeless community. That subsequently led to us doing that team going down there every Monday and Wednesday. They have a breakfast morning. That subsequently led to Mirvac actually having our own breakfast morning now every Friday. We run an additional breakfast morning. Our 200 George Street team run those initially, but we've got an online booking system in our office, and our business is actually now committed to running a breakfast morning for homeless people consistently, and it's fully booked. People are incredibly humbled by the experience. My CEO's done it. Half of my ELT have been down there. I think the other point is we then realised that there's more we can do just with the church as well to help. So we're a construction company, so during our community day we went down there, we've completely revamped the kitchens, we've tidied them up. There's some things that are just simple things that needed fixing that we can do very easily. For them it was a hardship. So, I mean, from a hands-on perspective, it's very important to us. I think a wider picture is also important to us. We're also talking to Big Issue about how we can do more work with them. And I know from my time in London, Big Issue is a big thing for us as well. So yes, it's important.
Good.
I mean, and yes, from our perspective, I mean, one of the things with the Resilient Cities research that specifically looks at those kind of social metrics, absolutely looks at homelessness at the city level in each of the markets, and then highlights it if that, you know, is a sort of key risk. I mean, inequality is one, and then the teams are specifically kind of engaging with those issues to see how they can have a positive impact within that particular city context. And then I think a lot of it, again, as you were saying, is about talking about stuff you already do, because I mean, Grosvenor is a hugely philanthropic company because of its sort of family associations, and we do all this stuff through the Westminster Foundation, but we never talk about it in the same vein as kind of the property business stuff, and it's a shame. So, you know, I've kind of been unpicking all these amazing stories of work that we do, and just really trying to kind of bring them into currency so that people understand as a whole, you know, kind of what the company's doing. But I'm also keen that rather than it just being philanthropic, as I think potentially in the past for us it has been a bit, is about making it kind of one of the business drivers. So, you know, as I said, with the Resilient Cities, thinking about it at the city level, thinking, okay, well, what can we do and how can we integrate it into everything else that we're doing rather than it sort of sitting aside. So I think one's about talking about it more, but also it's about a psyche of actually how we do that. So I'm trying to do both.
Good.
You have some bold visions, and that's you know, they're really commendable in terms of where they sit in terms of other companies in your field. However, you're very big developers as well, and I think some great things in there about supply chain, how you're working with those, and you're looking to get your own portfolio down and everything net positive by 2030. What about all those properties that you build that you then on-sell, and particularly, I suppose, the residential sector where you are building those and then the footprint of that goes on to become that of the residents individually? That doesn't show up particularly in your footprints as an organisation usually. How are you guys addressing that issue in terms of the big impact that the development side of your business is going to have?
So when we did our, at the very outset, when we hadn't really ever measured or tried to communicate kind of what we did at that point, we set about kind of starting to measure everything. But at that point, I wanted to get an idea of kind of the quantum of you know, just how things set in kind of priority order. And so we actually looked at our carbon emissions, but not just our existing portfolio, but actually the legacy of everything that we were developing and would develop in the pipeline, and what that would do for its life cycle, essentially. And so, you you know, I mean, obviously when you actually look at a window of time, 1 year, you get a complete disproportionate view to, if you consider, as you rightly say, what that development will be, because essentially you're responsible for that coming into being and therefore the life in it thereafter, almost to a degree, even if it's not under your ownership. And so that's something we did at the very outset to really understand, and that really helped the teams, I think, understand the critical importance of that concept design stage of actually designing this stuff in, because you're essentially determining to some degree, you know, how efficient that building would be for the next 60, 80 years, you know. So certainly that helped us really prioritise at that early stage sort of where we were going to improve and where we put our action.
I think I mentioned it when I was talking earlier around direct and influence, and one of the things we've been very focused on is looking at the influence we do have. So if we build a house, we know that we're not going to own it, but we're influencing how that person can actually inhabit that home moving forward. So whether it's just simple things like the orientation of that house can way outstrip an energy efficient air conditioning unit. So it's, you know, it's orientation, it's looking at all the factors that we can influence in how that person could live sustainably in the future. So that goes from district systems, like I mentioned up there, likes of Gugon, we're actually creating recycled water systems. In Victoria, we've just completed a study to look at 21 different options for delivering a new master plan community on the water side, and looked at different options of how we can best create the most efficient water solution for the person coming into that building. We won't own it at the end of the day, but that's the options we can end up with there. And then it's through to as well, again, I'll go back to this whole education piece. So we continue to educate people. We've got new community gardens at places like Harcrest. We're running classes for people so they can learn about growing food and actually living healthier lifestyles. Through to everyone who comes into a Mirvac portfolio building gets a user's guide, and that has a whole raft of sustainability initiatives that they can actually use to live more sustainably in their portfolio. And then one that my resi director loves, we call it the green switch, which is essentially when you leave the house, you press the switch and it turns everything off except for the refrigerator. So, you know, just simple things that you can do that actually can influence people's way of living. Obviously, at the end of the day, you can't tell that person how to live. You can only give them as much of a knee up as possible.
And on that, I think the agents is the big one for us. I mean, we've developed product in the past which, on the face of it, has been fantastic. But then you've gone around to kind of visit and say, oh, how's your, you know, grey water recycling system going? And they're like, what? And it's like, how can you not know, you know? And so somehow along that sort of, you know, path, it's broken down completely. And now, having had a couple of examples like that, which I'm not proud of, you know, it's really highlighted the issue. And so now we're very, very clear about exactly how that sort of knowledge is transferred. And also to ensure that, you know, whilst there may not be value attributable to that today, there certainly will be in the long run. So we need to start, you know, having this conversation with, you know, residential tenants in this instance, or, you know, purchasers, to ensure that they do understand what they're getting. And that's helped a lot, but it's quite hard. And we're also trying to define different ways of putting that forward, because I think until now it's been, and this possibly speaks to our portfolio of kind of quite high-end residential in London, but it's been about kind of, it's about reducing your energy bills and stuff. Well, that isn't really stuff that motivates people who occupy the stuff that we've got. So we're trying to sort of turn it on its head a bit and say, well, it's about more peace, it's about, you know, a better, you know, so it's all about more. It's more sort of tranquility, sort of it's your retreat in central London, etc., etc. So really kind of trying to put it in a language that will actually mean something to them and generate the behaviour that you're referring to. Yeah.
Who was next? Might have been you.
Paul Elson Hughes from Westpac. I just had a quick question. You alluded to a little bit when you talked about the net positive piece and the importance of measurement. You know, typically organisations set baselines, they come up with their plan of work, they're busy about doing things, but we all know that businesses are far more dynamic creature than that. And how have you factored in, particularly given the long-term nature of some of what you're trying to do, that dynamism, and how business might actually look quite different by the time we get to the end?
Yeah, look, we've set out in our business a set of boundaries by which we're going to operate that rating. So we know that our portfolio is dynamic and will evolve over time, and we might have a smaller portfolio or a bigger portfolio. It might be older buildings, newer buildings. So we've actually set clearly, and we made it public as well in this year's report, a set of boundaries by which we operate those, and we're going to measure ourselves. So, for example, we've put in a criteria that we do not count buildings unless we've owned them for 2 years, because it takes a year to actually get control of it, and then another year to be able to do something with it. So we can't. And we've also, coming up to the end of 2030, we've also put in criteria around, when a building when the last time is that building will count towards the 2030 figure. Because if on the 2 days before 2030 we go and buy the biggest building, we go and buy a Westpac building, we're not going to be able to deliver our net. We're not going to be able to deliver our net positive outcome based on that. So it's really important you put boundaries and you're very specific about how you're actually delivering it. So that's how we're coping with that at the moment. To answer the question.
I think, the key difference between what the two of us are doing, to my mind anyway, is that because my role's at kind of the holding company level, it is less prescriptive, and so it is much more around kind of that sort of influencing and persuading. And actually when we set out, we did try to set quite a specific target. We said, okay, all of you across the board, we want 10% carbon reduction in the first year, whatever it was. And it just met with absolute sort of chaos and sort of everyone up in arms. And because, quite rightly, the guys here were saying, well, we've got, 5-star Green Star buildings, they're all performing to within an inch of their life already. We can't possibly give you 10%, it's probably more like 2. Versus, the sort of Asian counterparts who probably could have given us 20 quite easily. And so there sort of wasn't the equity in the process. And then what happened was that they then went back, sort of, really thought through their buildings and then put forward what they thought they could do. And challenged themselves, and that became very much the sort of modus operandi, and that really worked. So now, and Simon knows kind of the heartache we've had around this, but I think the way we try and do it now is very much to set out a big picture, sort of long-term vision, really inspire the teams and say, okay, this is what we want you to contribute to. How you do that is almost up to you. And so they've sort of then prioritised in turn what, and that kind of goes back to the city profiling and, the country kind of dynamics of what they think they can contribute, and then set the targets themselves. And actually that's become, you would think that would kind of be subject to dilution, but actually that's become, because there's kind of that inherent competitiveness between the opcos, it actually works very well. So it's kind of a direction of travel that we sort of set, but then they sort of pick their route almost.
I think we've got time for one more question. I can't recall whose hand was next, but it might have been you, Kate. So let's.
Okay, I'll give you a break. Sorry, Paul. It's kind of specifically around the city resilience work that you've done. Just curious in terms of how that's actually used, because I'm just assuming that looking at that list, countries or cities that are already reasonably developed are going to have a higher resilience score, which would suggest a more reasonable place for investment. But by the same token, without companies like yourselves doing the work that you would do in those cities, what are the chances that they will develop that resilience that you're then looking for in order to invest? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So how is that seen as okay, let's bring them up, or is it seen as we better avoid that location?
No, it's a good challenge, and I'm always very keen to say, just because we've done it doesn't mean that we're going to kind of say, oh, only the top 10 cities and we won't invest in any others. Absolutely not. I mean, they're all cities that are in there because we're interested in them. By definition, many that are less resilient, for example, the Asian cities we're in already, and we've made a kind of long-term commitment to. So it's not to say that we wouldn't invest in them, absolutely not. But it is really to understand those risks in much better. So I think, and this is kind of very anecdotal, but I think we'd sort of, before at the boardroom level, it would kind of be like, oh no, we won't go to Mexico City because, we went there once and we didn't, do you remember that guy? We met those guys. But there was always kind of anecdotal stuff, and there was, okay, but why? We haven't actually systematically evaluated each of our markets, and I think that's what we were really keen to do, so kind of get away with any of this kind of baggage that we might have. And that goes to markets that we really do like. I mean, in many instances, they didn't perform as well as we thought they might. I mean, London, for example, is only 18th on our ranking of 50. Bit uncomfortable, we're already there. So how can we work to improve that? So absolutely, we go there. I mean, I presented the findings in Manila that was quite challenging, but again, it was kind of really interesting discussion with the city government there to say, okay, and they were very welcoming of it. Well, how can we improve? How can we attract long-term investors like Grosvenor? Because you're exactly what we need to, to your point, to really start to build
I
a
guess
city
that's the
plan.
question, does it launch a conversation then with
Yeah.
yeah.
Which has been very helpful and very interesting in some respects already in many cities, yeah.
From a development point of view, it's probably fair to say that in a vulnerable city, you then get some guidance to inform the design to mitigate the risks associated with that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. And you can, at the city level, it's about the prioritisation of where that investment really needs to occur. And at the project level, it's very much around thinking, how can we mitigate specific risks? I mean, the example I showed of the Bermondsey project, yes, it's about affordability, it's also about crime. So how can we actually design out, sort of the dark corners that, think about the footfall, think about the lighting, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks for the questions. Apologies to those who didn't get to.
And with that, I'm going to hand back to Chris to wrap up our session.
Yes, thanks very much, Paul, Kate and Simon, for a fantastic discussion and presentations, really fascinating examples of the data there. I mean, I think one of the things that really struck me is that as companies, you're really dealing with some very big issues that come there. You're talking about 1.5 planets, sea level rise, water access, waste usage and all that sort of thing. And I suppose one of the issues I might be a follow-up discussion, might be what role government and all this, because it's clear there's corporates leading, and some corporates are leading in this space, but there's systemic issues that also need sort of a government discussion there. So it'd be interesting to sort of follow up on the interaction between leading companies and governments in designing cities of the future that are more resilient to the sort of challenges, pretty substantial challenges we're going to face in the next 20 years. So marvellous, really enjoyed that. Thanks for everybody for coming. Fascinating discussion, and please stay in touch. We'll keep in touch with future Burn events around these sort of issues. And thanks again for Simon for really sort of developing this idea and getting it all organised and making it happen. It was great. And look forward to seeing you in the future. Thanks very much.